Chapter 401 Alliance of Two Major Forces. Xandros' energy suddenly surged. Fabian was stunned. Xandros looked like an ordinary old man. He did not expect Xandros to be so powerful. When he was young, he had seen Xandros once or twice. Back then, he did not think that there was anything special about Xandros. Only now did Fabian discover that Xandros had actually been keeping his powers hidden for a long time. Don't be angry, great uncle. I may have joined Shadowgate, but at the very core, I'm still part of the Stewart family. Grandma even asked me to bring you a letter, Fabian said quickly in the most respectful way possible. Fabian passed the letter to Xandros. Xandros took a quick glance. In the letter, it said that Fabian had only joined Shadowgate for the purpose of improving his skills. Moreover, for the Stewart family to grow stronger, somebody needed to step forward. She also hoped that Xandros could help Fabian since Caspian wanted to hinder the Stewart family's revival plan. What nonsense. Marilyn must have gone senile. Xandros fumed. He tore the envelope into pieces. Great uncle. Fabian's face went frigid. Was his great uncle insisting on being impartial? Get out. I won't help you, Xandros said coldly. Old bastard. Fabian was livid. He was here as a representative of Shadowgate, and yet Xandros was not willing to compromise even when they were a family. Xandros, you old fart. Don't make choices you'll regret later. Think about the villagers. Don't you know that they'll be the ones to suffer if you offend Shadowgate? Fabian said spitefully. Suddenly, there was a loud smack. Xandros had slapped Fabiana across the face. You old bastard! How dare you? Fabian trembled with fury. He did not expect that Xandros would lay a finger on him. Moreover, Xandros was so fast that Fabian did not even know what was happening at first. I can't believe you have the nerve to say that you're from the Stewart family when you're blatantly threatening the lives of your own people. You're a monster. If you dare lay a finger on them, I'll make sure to dispose of you, Xandros said coldly. Fabian was shaken. He knew that he was definitely no match for Xandros. Fine, since you won't appreciate my goodwill, I'll have this reported to Gilbert. Get ready to accept Shadowgate's punishment, Fabian said before turning around to leave. He was afraid that Xandros would really fight him if he continued confronting him. Piece of shit, Xandros cursed as he watched Fabian leave. On a mound near the Stewart family estate was a bonfire. There were thousands of tents nearby as well. All of the people from the TMAA were staying there. Nixon was sitting inside the centermost tent. Suddenly, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Caspian's strength is too strong. Although I was healed in time, I still suffered some serious internal injuries. I guess it's not realistic for us to obtain the Eldorian Scroll fragment this time, Nixon said with a cold expression. He trembled every time he thought of the fight he had with Caspian. If it was not for the foundational strength Nixon had, he might have already been killed by Caspian's punch. What's Caspian's real identity? Is he really a level above a Supreme Grandmaster? Nixon murmured. He had initially disregarded Caspian. However, after this battle, he became slightly afraid. It seemed like he would need to come up with a well-devised plan in order to get rid of Caspian. That bastard, Horace, must have known how powerful Caspian was, and yet he didn't even bother giving me a heads up. He must have wanted to see me make a fool of myself. Bastard, Nixon said through gritted teeth. Horace had fought with Caspian before. He must have been able to gauge the extent of Caspian's strength. But he did not even bother giving him a warning, and allowed him to humiliate himself in front of tens of thousands of expert martial artists. Nixon might have already become the butt of everyone's joke ever since the battle. Mr. Xenos, someone called from the outside. Who's there? It's me, Horace. How's your injury, Mr. Xenos? When he heard that it was Horace, he scowled. He knew that Horace was not genuinely concerned about him. Horace might even be happy if he died. He could never really know what Horace was thinking. Letting him stay would be risky. If it were not for the chairman, Nixon would have already wanted to kill Horace a long time ago. Come in, Nixon said. He took a deep breath and composed himself. How are you, Mr. Xenos? How's the injury? Horace asked as he walked in, his face full of concern. Nixon scorned, but he did not show it. I see you're concerned about me. It's not a big deal, Nixon said calmly. That's good. As long as you're all right. Caspian was too cruel to have treated you that way, Horace said. There was a trace of disappointment in his eyes. That's enough. If you have nothing else to say, please leave. I need an early rest, Nixon said irritably. Horace did not know how to choose the right timing for the right words. In Nixon's eyes, Horace was a loser. Horace's expression turned bitter. He knew very well that Nixon looked down on him. The way Nixon treated him made him feel disrespected. After all, he was still the protector of the TMAA. Even though his heart was full of resentment, he did not dare to speak his mind. "Mr. Xandros, the people of Shadowgate would like to see you," Horace said. Shadowgate? Nixon was puzzled. A serious expression was plastered across his face. Shadowgate had always been their enemy. Considering how they had suddenly come to look for him, something must be going on. "Why would the people from Shadowgate want to see me?" Nixon asked. "I'm not sure. Probably because they want to join forces with us," Horace said. News regarding the incident at Mount Evercloud had already made its way around Diatoran. Caspian had overpowered Nixon with one punch, insulted Shadowgate, and humiliated all the expert martial artists. At first, Nixon was still at his wits' end, trying to find a way to deal with Caspian. Now that Caspian had gained more enemies, it was a good thing for them. "What are you still standing there for? Then, invite them in," Nixon said impatiently. "Yes, sir?" Horace nodded before stepping out hurriedly. 1 minute later, Gilbert walked in. He laughed and said, "I thought you'd already been killed by his one punch, but it seems like you're fine." "Sorry for the letdown, but I'm still well and alive," Nixon said, somewhat upset by Gilbert's remarks. Gilbert let out a laugh again before taking a seat in front of Nixon. Shadowgate and the TMAA had always been enemies. There was a false sense of familiarity between the two. After all, they were long-time enemies. If it were not for their shared goal and common enemy, Nixon would never want to talk with the people of Shadowgate face to face. "I'll just get to the point. I'd like to join forces with you," Gilbert said with a smile. "That's not a problem. The issue is, what about the Eldorian Scroll fragment? How are we going to distribute it among ourselves?" Nixon asked right away. Chapter 402, Are You the Boss of Me? With the current situation, there was no way for Shadowgate or the Team AA to win against Caspian if they were to fight him alone. They had to join forces. Nixon did want to kill Caspian, but his mission this time was to bring the Eldorian Scroll fragment back. If he failed to obtain the Eldorian Scroll fragment, he would not be able to explain himself to Ace. "Let's just destroy Caspian first. As for the Eldorian Scroll fragment, we could just have a fair competition, right?" Gilbert laughed and said, he would never hand over the Eldorian Scroll fragment unconditionally. The reason Shadowgate traveled here this time was also to search for the Eldorian Scroll fragment. It was common knowledge that an innate Grandmaster would need to overcome certain challenges to advance to the next level. The only way for them to advance and become a Supreme Grandmaster was to obtain the Eldorian Scroll fragment and decrypt the code. "You have a deal," Nixon said as he nodded. "As long as we join forces, Caspian will be defeated," Gilbert said excitedly. "Let's not celebrate it too early. Caspian's way stronger than you think. Only the chairman's powers are around the same level as his. If we could get the Morrison family from Dord City to join forces with us, our chances of winning would be even higher," Nixon replied. Gilbert looked visibly upset after hearing what Nixon had said. Nixon noticed the change in expression and asked, "What's wrong?" "To be honest, I went to visit Miss Morrison before I came here. She refuses to join forces," Gilbert said, feeling frustrated. Nixon was stunned. Gilbert was from Shadowgate. If it were anybody else, they would have already accepted his offer. How arrogant of the Morrison family. "Forget it. Since the Morrisons refuse to join us, we'll attack them after we get rid of Caspian," Gilbert said. "It's getting late. Let's just carry on as discussed. I'll make a move first," Gilbert said before leaving the tent. After Gilbert had left, Nixon could not help but let out a laugh. Gilbert of the mighty Shadowgate, getting brutally rejected came off as something surprising to Nixon. Gilbert heard Nixon's laughter, but did not look back. He disappeared into the night. After Gilbert left, another figure slid into the tent. "Greetings, Mr. Xandros," Fabian said. "Any updates on the task I assigned you, Fabian?" Nixon asked. "Mr. Xandros, forgive my incompetence. Xandros, that old man, refuses to cooperate with us," Fabian said. Feeling somewhat disconcerted, Nixon was not the least bit surprised. He had seen this coming. "The Stewart family is way more complicated than we imagined," Nixon murmured. "Mr. Xandros, Should we just kill Xandros, or launch a massacre on the Stewart family estate? Fabian asked. Nixon was momentarily stunned. Fabian was even more vicious than him. He would even harm his own family. That said, Fabian was not biologically related to them. There's no need for that. Xandros is already old. He won't be able to affect us in any way. We should place all our attention on obtaining the Eldorian Scroll fragment. We shall accomplish this important task first, Nixon said. Yes, sir, Fabian answered. Now that Nixon had given his orders, Fabian did not dare to retort. The Stewart family estate was quiet for the next 2 days. Nonetheless, the tremors were still occurring on Mount Evercloud. Everybody was anticipating the appearance of the Eldorian Scroll fragment. At night, the mountain shook even more violently. The people at the TMAA cantonment were planning for their expedition to Mount Evercloud. Have everyone set out for Mount Evercloud immediately. After having rested for 2 days, Nixon had almost recovered from his injuries. At the same time, the people of Shadowgate had started heading toward Mount Evercloud. Countless expert martial artists set out once more. In a small courtyard in the mountains, Jin was seated on a stone bench as she sipped on some tea. She was unperturbed by the quakes on the mountain. Ms. Morrison, the other forces have all begun their hunt for the Eldorian Scroll fragment. Shouldn't we make a move as well? Ginger asked with a tone of urgency. All the other subordinates of the Morrison family were also anxious. It was no surprise that they would want to obtain the Eldorian Scroll fragment as well. If they were to fail this mission and return to Dord City empty-handed, they would definitely be punished. However, Jin seemed unconcerned at all, and this was making everyone anxious. It had also taken a lot of courage on Ginger's part to come forward and ask this question. Is there any news on Caspian? Jin asked as she lifted her head to look at Ginger. To Jin, nothing else mattered other than Caspian. She only wanted to know how Caspian was doing. Previously, the people of Shadowgate had invited her to join forces with them to defeat Caspian. What a joke. Caspian was the man of her dreams. Ginger was dumbfounded to hear her question. She could not understand what was so great about Caspian, that Jin was hopelessly in love with him. They were here on a mission, but it seemed like Jin couldn't care less. There are no updates on Caspian. He's still staying at the elementary school. Once there are any updates, I'll report to you at once, Ginger said with utmost politeness. Miss Morrison, the purpose of our expedition is to obtain the Eldorian Scroll fragment. Isn't it rather unbefitting to keep your attention on Caspian all the time? She continued. Are you the boss of me now? Jin questioned Ginger, visibly upset. I wouldn't dare. Ginger was startled. She lowered her head immediately. Don't forget, you're my secretary. You're just a servant. You have no right to tell me what I should do. Jin said coldly. Ginger nodded her head and remained silent, not daring to make a sound. She began harboring resentment toward Caspian. Before this, Jin had never rebuked her before. Even though she was only her secretary, their relationship was amicable. However, everything had changed with Caspian's appearance. But if she were to criticize Caspian, she would be reprimanded. Since you're all so impatient, let us go. Then, Jin said as she rose from her seat slowly while straightening her clothes out. The rest were relieved to hear this. It was fortunate that Jin had not forgotten about their mission. Meanwhile, at the elementary school in the Stewart family estate, Caspian was leisurely sitting inside the office. Everyone else has gone to snatch the Eldorian Scroll fragment. What about you? Why are you still here? Xandros said as he glared at Caspian. Take a chill pill, Caspian said with a smile. He was not worried that the others might obtain the Eldorian Scroll fragment. Mr. Stewart Sr., I heard that Fabian visited you? Caspian asked with a casual tone. He had done a background check on the Stewart family before. That was how he knew about Marilyn's adopted grandson, Fabian. Chapter 403, Tomb Within the Mountain. That's right. Fabian wanted me to help him obtain the Eldorian Scroll fragment, but I rejected him, Xandros replied to Caspian. Caspian was not surprised to hear this. He knew about the matters regarding Shadowgate. Nonetheless, Fabian did a good job keeping his interests hidden. He had already joined Shadowgate when he was young. I didn't expect Marilyn to be so secretive, Caspian said with a smile. Caspian? Sylvia shouted as she came inside in a hurried manner. I've got the latest update. Shadowgate, the TMAA, and the Morrison family have all made their moves. Also, the TMAA and Shadowgate have joined forces, she continued. After hearing Sylvia's report, Caspian rose from his seat. His imposing manner startled Xandros. Even though he had lived for over 100 years, he had never seen anyone like Caspian. It seemed like Caspian's background was even more impressive than he imagined. "Mr. Stewart Sr., let us make a move as well," Caspian said to Xandros. There was a crowd on Mount Evercloud. There were more people this time than the last. In the past few days, many expert martial artists had rushed over. At that moment, Mount Evercloud had cracked open. Everybody was waiting for the appearance of the Eldorian Scroll fragment. Suddenly, somebody's laughter could be heard. It gradually became louder. Everyone turned their heads toward the laughter. "I'd like to give a warm welcome to all you martial arts experts for coming all the way here to witness the manifestation of the Eldorian Scroll fragment." Several figures were seen rushing forward. Hundreds of people were gathered on the top of a mountain. When they saw Caspian and his men appear, their lips twisted in disgust. All they wanted was to tear him apart. In their heads, they were thinking how shameless Caspian was. He was so full of himself. It was as if the scroll fragment belonged to him. "Caspian, can't you take it down a notch?" Xandros asked, feeling rather uneasy. "I can't help it. My powers don't allow me to," Caspian said with his hands on his back. Xandros was even more speechless. He had lived for over 100 years, and yet he had never been so ostentatious about his powers. On the contrary, Caspian could not wait for everyone to know about his existence. As for Sylvia and the armored soldiers, they were totally unperturbed. Caspian was the Diatoran god of war, after all. It was natural for the Diatoran god of war to keep a high profile. Even the kings of other countries had to give deference to Caspian. "Why is everyone suddenly so quiet? Don't you welcome my arrival?" Caspian said with a smile. Everyone was rendered speechless. Caspian was too full of himself. "Enough with your arrogance, Caspian! Everyone present today has earned their rightful place here, as we're all experts in the traditional martial arts sphere." "Your days are numbered," Nixon said, infuriated. Gilbert's expression turned glum after hearing what Nixon had just said. Nixon must have lost his mind. Why must he bicker with Caspian? "Isn't this the head elder who ran away a few days ago? I thought you'd already died. I guess I was too lenient on you the other day," Caspian sneered. "Fuck." Nixon was incensed. He had no choice but to keep quiet. Also, those ghost wannabes from Shadowgate. "Gilbert, right? Why are you hiding yourself? I'd like a duel." Caspian taunted as he looked at Gilbert. Gilbert did not respond. His top priority was to obtain the Eldorian Scroll fragment before moving on to other agendas. "Bastard, do you think we're weak?" Some of the members of Shadowgate snapped as they could no longer tolerate Caspian's insults. "You morons are all talk and no bite. I guess Shadowgate is just a bunch of losers. You won't even make a move," Caspian said with a smile. He was trying to taunt them into action. "Fuck, I want to kill him. Me too. Count me in." The people of Shadowgate were shouting. "Yeah, Caspian's too cocky. Let's teach him a lesson." "That's right. Otherwise, he'll continue trampling over us." Even the people from the other forces had also chimed in. "Silence," Gilbert shouted loudly. "Enough with the nonsense and just stay put. Did I give you any orders?" "Why are you in a rush?" Gilbert said coldly. "Yes, sir," the people answered with their heads lowered. No matter how infuriated they were, they did not dare to disobey Gilbert's orders. The expert martial artists were angry, but they did not dare to utter a word more either. The TMAA was a very powerful organization, but even they were giving in to Caspian. This showed that Caspian was truly something else. Who would know who his next target was going to be? Would it be the Morrison family? It would be a sight to behold if Caspian and the Morrison family of Dord City were to battle each other. Both the TMAA and Shadowgate were the ones who looked forward to it the most. Alas, they got it all wrong. Caspian looked in the Morrison family's direction when he caught sight of Jin, gazing lovingly at him. Their eyes met. Jin was torn on the inside. Her feelings for Caspian were delicate. All she could see was him. On the other hand, Ginger stared at Caspian with eyes that were filled with resentment. Nevertheless, Jin did not say anything. She was afraid of saying the wrong thing. When the people saw this, they were all perplexed. What were these two doing? Why were they not saying anything? Eventually, Caspian turned around with a sigh. He could not bring himself to insult her. When Jin saw him turn around, her feelings became extremely complicated. She really wished that Caspian would strike up a conversation with her first, even if it was an argument. But Caspian did not say anything at all. Tears began welling up in Jin's eyes. Nonetheless, she had to regain her composure and hold her emotions back as there were too many people around. Otherwise, the Morrison family would be disgraced. Gilbert and Nixon exchanged looks. They got a feeling that something was going on between Caspian and Jin. What could it be? Both of them smirked at the same time. It was at that moment that the quakes got even more violent. The Eldorian Scroll fragment must be coming out, Xandros cried out. Everyone turned their attention to Mount Evercloud. A crevice appeared right in the center of the mountain. It kept getting wider and wider. When the opening was wide enough, a tomb could be seen inside the mountain. People started wondering who it was that had built their tomb inside Mount Evercloud. Imagine the amount of resources and manpower needed to build it. The Eldorian Scroll fragment is finally going to appear, Xandros suddenly cried out as he knelt on the ground. The tomb belonged to the Stewart family members who had passed. Even though the tomb had appeared, nobody dared to act recklessly, in case there were any traps inside. Why don't you get up first, Mr. Stewart Sr.? Where's the entrance to the tomb? Caspian asked. Don't rush. There are traps inside the tomb. You'll die if you rush in there now, Xandros said with a sigh as he got to his feet. A look of concern was plastered across his face. Humans in the past were always full of surprises. It had already been over hundreds of years, and yet these traps were still functional. Chapter 404, The Threatening Powers of the Traps. Gilbert, Nixon, and the others were thinking the same thing. They knew better than to enter the tomb hastily. They planned to observe before making a move. After a few minutes had passed, the center of Mount Evercloud split into two and the tomb inside was completely exposed. The structures inside were uneven and extremely grandiose. What a bunch of losers. What's there to be afraid of? This Eldorian Scroll is mine, an expert martial artist said as he rushed out. Nothing happened when he reached the area outside the tomb. He laughed. What a bunch of cowards. This Eldorian Scroll fragment belongs to me now, he said excitedly. The other expert martial artists exchanged glances. His words motivated them. Several more people rushed out. About 100 people arrived outside the tomb. Caspian remained unperturbed. Mr. Lynch, should we be making a move? What if someone else gets it before us? Astor asked anxiously. He did not covet the Eldorian Scroll fragment. However, it was not because he did not want it, but that he was too weak for it. If Caspian was the one who obtained the Eldorian Scroll fragment, it would increase his powers greatly. On that account, he could continue working under Caspian in an environment that suited him. No need to rush. Having them test the routes works in our favor. If you plan to join their suicide mission, be my guest, Caspian said nonchalantly. Astor became mute instantly. The reason Caspian did not feel the need to rush was because Xandros had remained calm the entire time. He had not made any move yet, because he knew the tomb best. At that moment, there were hundreds of people outside the tomb. Are we going as well, Miss Morrison? Ginger asked curiously. No, Jin said dismissively. Her gaze had never left Caspian. If Caspian stayed put, she would do the same. Let's push the door open, someone said as hundreds of people united to force open the door to the tomb. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. Something had happened. Countless arrows flew out of the tomb with lightning speed. Take cover. There are hidden arrows. All the expert martial artists were flabbergasted. Run! Someone from the crowd cried out. Hundreds of expert martial artists began running for their lives. But it was too late. Blood-curdling screams could be heard as more and more expert martial artists were impaled. They died on the spot. Those arrows were coated in poison. There were hundreds of expert martial artists, and it only took 2 to 3 minutes for all of them to die. The ones who planned to join them were all stunned. Many who died were eternal grandmasters. Even with their powers, they were not able to avoid the surprise attack. It was now clear that the tomb was filled with grave danger. Nixon and Gilbert exchanged glances. Both of them felt unsettled. With hundreds of expert martial artists dead, the entire Mount Evercloud felt ominous. The scene they had just witnessed was truly terrifying. No one dared to approach the tomb anymore. Let's go, kiddo, Xandros said to Caspian in a lowered voice. Wouldn't that be a suicide mission? Caspian said, momentarily stunned by what Xandros had just suggested. The corpses had piled up like mountains, and yet Xandros was planning to go ahead. Are you serious? The first trap has already been triggered. There's absolutely no danger, Xandros said irritably. Are you sure, Mr. Stewart Sr.? I'm not afraid because those traps can't hurt me, but I'm worried about you, Caspian responded, feeling uncertain. Enough with the nonsense. There's only one trap in this tomb. Xandros shot a glance at Caspian. As he was a steward, he would undoubtedly know a thing or two about the tomb. Nobody could have ever imagined that there would be this many people appearing outside the tomb. Nevertheless, that trap was truly spectacular. It could actually kill so many expert martial artists. Not even the Stewart family's predecessors could have imagined that there would be tens of thousands of expert martial artists gathering here to fight for the Eldorian Scroll fragment. Mr. Stewart Sr., do you happen to have a map of the tomb? If you do, there's no need for us to be intimidated anymore, Caspian asked excitedly. They could enter the tomb with assurance if there really was a map. Of course not. The map of the tomb has been missing for a long time. We'd better hurry. If we go any slower, the entire tomb will collapse, Xandros said urgently. Even Caspian was shocked to hear this. This place was really full of traps. The tomb would even self-destruct just to prevent outsiders from trespassing. It seems like no one dares to enter the tomb. I guess it's just me. Then, don't be jealous when I obtain the Eldorian Scroll fragment, Caspian smiled. He brought Sylvia and the others with him to enter the tomb. Xandros would not be wrong about this. Great uncle, it's dangerous inside. I'll protect you. Caspian smiled as he placed his arm on Xandros' shoulder. Xandros' face darkened. Caspian was sharp-witted. Was Caspian afraid that he would deceive him? Both Gilbert's and Nixon's expressions went frigid as they watched Caspian move toward the tomb. They were scared that Caspian would steal the Eldorian Scroll fragment away, but they were also afraid of the traps. They could only stand there and watch. In their minds, they were hoping for Caspian to be killed by the traps. Caspian! Jin murmured loudly under her breath. She was very anxious. Could it be that Caspian was oblivious to the dangers of the tomb? What would happen to her if Caspian was hurt? Everyone had their attention on Caspian. He brought his team and came before the tomb. There were corpses everywhere. The stench of blood filled the air. If an ordinary person saw this, they would faint from shock. But it was different for Caspian and the others. They had been through hundreds of battles and had witnessed scenes that were even more tragic. What a bunch of brainless losers. There are only 3 to 4 innate grandmasters and yet they acted on their own. Caspian shook his head with disapproval. Stop blabbering away and come help me, Xandros said irritably. All right. Caspian came to the front of the tomb's door. He pushed really hard with both palms. There was a loud sound. The surroundings shook again. Everyone was shocked as they did not realize that Caspian's strength was this terrifying. Gilbert and Nixon scowled. Both of them were thinking of the same thing. They must get rid of Caspian. Otherwise, he would be extremely troublesome. Loud booming sounds could be heard repeatedly. The door of the tomb shook violently. Sylvia and the rest were mentally prepared to defend Caspian from any hidden weapons. All the other expert martial artists held their breaths as well, their full concentration on Caspian and his troop. Jin became really nervous. She was afraid that something might happen to Caspian. However, a few minutes had passed and nothing had happened at all. Even the door to the tomb did not open. What's going on? Mr. Stewart Sr., Caspian asked, confused. Even though he had not used all his strength, it was enough to push the door open. However, the door did not budge at all. Did you think that you could open it with brute force? Are you kidding me? Xandros asked irritably. This door had another mechanism. Xandros came to the door and placed a rock at the very bottom. Xandros twisted it slightly. Suddenly, there was a click sound, followed by a loud boom. Following that, a vibrating sound could be heard. Chapter 405, The Sickle Formation. The enormous stone door rose slowly. This can't be real. You know you could have just told me, Mr. Stewart Sr. Caspian couldn't help but curse. Aren't you the almighty Caspian? I guess you still need my guidance, after all. Xandros teased. Caspian was speechless. Xandros was really a cunning old man. Let's hurry. We better not waste more time, Xandros said as he turned around, getting ready to enter the tomb. The expert martial artists were all stunned that the tomb's door opened so easily. Hundreds of people had just died. Everyone gaped at Xandros. Indeed, he knew a lot about the tomb. Whoever was to follow him would be sure to have a smooth journey. Hurry! Don't let them get it before we do, Nixon exclaimed. That's right. Let's go. Everyone, the Eldorian Scroll fragment is in there. We must seize the opportunity, Gilbert cried out. With the tomb door opened, whoever was to be the first one to enter would be the one to obtain the Eldorian Scroll fragment. Let's go. We mustn't let Caspian get it first. Charge! The clamor reverberated in all directions as countless expert martial artists rushed forward. However, the TMAA, Shadowgate, and Jin did not join them. Gilbert and Nixon had a smug look on their faces. They had conspired for these expert martial artists to be the first line of defense against Caspian. When Caspian saw them charging toward him, his eyes were ablaze. Ungrateful bastards, I gave you a chance, but you're trying to snatch the fragment from me. Then, he ordered Sylvia, who was behind him. Sylvia, destroy them. Give them a taste of our wrath. Yes, Caspian. Sylvia's face darkened as she rushed out with 100 armored soldiers. Even though there were only 100 of them, their menacing energy was overwhelming. These brave and skilled armored soldiers were about to show their true strength. Before anyone could even react, the armored soldiers had already progressed to the front line, killing everyone in their paths. Suddenly, there was a glaring flash. None of the armored soldiers flinched. They were up against tens of thousands of expert martial artists. Nonetheless, Sylvia remained unnerved. Her expression remained eerily calm. They had been through many battles before. No danger could ever frighten them. Only battles could make them zealous. Aster and Avery exchanged glances. Should we join them? Aster asked. Even though they were also eternal grandmasters, they had to be careful when going up against the expert martial artists. If they were to act recklessly, they would die. Sylvia and her team's valor was astonishing. Of course, we have to. Let's fight till the end, Avery said through gritted teeth. She was in the lead, and Aster followed closely behind. Now that they were working under Caspian, they had to obey his orders. Hey kid, can't you take it down a notch? Why do you insist on going all out? There are tens and thousands of expert martial artists. What will you do if your men are killed? Xandros asked in a concerned tone. Caspian's men were brave and not afraid of dying, but the expert martial artists were also not easy opponents. Caspian had never considered this matter before. There was no need for him to. He was not concerned about the armored soldiers' abilities. Mr. Stewart Sr., just sit back and watch. I believe in my men, Caspian answered confidently. He looked at the battlefield. There was not an ounce of concern on his face. The armored soldiers had fought with him for many years. They had been through life and death. There were many times when they had saved the day. There were also numerous battles where they covered the road with the blood of their enemies. In the beginning, Caspian once led 5,000 armored soldiers into the enemy's lair and fought against more than 300,000 enemy troops. These 5,000 armored soldiers went in and killed the enemy's troops, throwing them into disarray. In the end, tens of thousands of enemy soldiers were obliterated. This was how powerful these armored soldiers were. Xandros was puzzled as to why Caspian was so sure of himself. Were these armored soldiers really that powerful? The expert martial artists felt humiliated. There were thousands of them while Sylvia was going up against them with 100 soldiers. Kill them all. Let's show Caspian that we expert martial artists are not weak. Yeah, let's fight back against him. Many expert martial artists were indignant. They had been wanting to get back at Caspian for a long time. If it were not for the Eldorian Scroll fragment, they would have already besieged him. Now that there were only hundreds of men on Caspian's side, they felt like it was a golden opportunity for them. They must get rid of Caspian today. They wanted to let Caspian pay the price for his arrogance. Kill them. Thousands of expert martial artists swarmed in on Caspian's team. What a bunch of ignorant fools! Numbers don't mean anything. Into formation, Sylvia shouted. Hundreds of armored soldiers got into a strange formation that resembled a sword. Kill them, the armored soldiers shouted in unison. Their roars could be felt from all directions. In the blink of an eye, the armored guards were engulfed by the expert martial artists. Gilbert and Nixon had a smug look on their faces. This time, Caspian would surely die. As long as Caspian died, their chances of snatching the Eldorian Scroll fragment would increase. Loud bangs were heard. Screams came and went. The shouts continued. The battle between both sides quickly reached a fever pitch. Sylvia and the rest were going all out. With every swing of their swords, a head fell to the floor. The hundreds of armored soldiers were like killing machines. They were all fearless. Astor and Avery, who were following behind, were extremely shocked. These 100 armored soldiers were unstoppable. It was as if they had combined all their strengths. The thousands of expert martial artists were all strong. However, they were no match for the armored soldiers. "This is the sickle formation," Astor and Avery suddenly shouted. They had some insight and recognized the formation of the armored soldiers. This kind of formation was a unique formation within the military. Astor and Avery looked at each other with a surprised look on their faces. What was Caspian's real identity? They could not comprehend it. They rushed out as well. The entire Mount Evercloud had become a purgatory on Earth. Rivers of blood flowed, and broken limbs were scattered all over the place. Nixon and Gilbert were stupefied. How can this be? Nixon could not believe his eyes. Thousands of expert martial artists were no match for these armored soldiers. Gilbert was extremely resentful. He had planned to make use of the expert martial artists to kill Caspian. But they could not even lay a finger on Caspian at all. On the other hand, Caspian's men alone had easily subdued them. What a bunch of useless trash, Gilbert murmured angrily. Caspian was too powerful. He must be killed today. Otherwise, he would become the biggest threat to Shadowgate. On the other hand, Jin had a completely different set of emotions when watching the scene before her. She was emotional as she watched Caspian's men battle with valor. As expected of the man of my dreams. Even his men are also courageous and good at fighting, Jin murmured. Her tender and loving gaze fell upon Caspian. Her feelings for him grew even stronger. Chapter 406, Nobody dares to lay a finger on them. Retreat. These people are all crazy. Retreat. Otherwise, we'll be dead. Run for your lives. Sylvia and her team's unrestrained attacks completely vanquished the expert martial artist's psychological defense. They shouted miserably as they retreated from their successive defeat. Tens of thousands of expert martial artists were fleeing in all directions, as if they had lost their minds. Sylvia laughed. Such weaklings, she said. As the expert martial artists retreated, Sylvia took advantage of the victory and led the armor soldiers to pursue them. The expert martial artists had lost all their will to fight as well as the confidence to resist. They were even hoping that they could grow an extra pair of legs to help them flee faster. The fact that only 100 armored soldiers could defeat them so tragically was something out of the ordinary. Only after running over 100 yards did the armored soldiers stop chasing. Even though the armored soldiers were great fighters, they were still humans, after all. They were not unsusceptible to feeling weak from too much exertion. The intense battle had tired them out. It would be challenging for them to kill all the expert martial artists entirely. Nonetheless, there were nearly 1,000 corpses on the ground, with rivers of blood flowing everywhere. Bodies piled up like hills. If an ordinary person were to come across this scene, they would surely tremble. Sylvia and the others were covered in blood. As they stood in the center of the battlefield, they looked like grim reapers. The retreating expert martial artists looked at Sylvia and the others with consternation. It was at this moment that Nixon stepped forward and shouted, "Don't panic, everyone. They're only human. They must have reached their limits from the battle earlier. If we try to attack them one more time, we'll definitely be able to get rid of them all." "He's right. Let's all come together and kill these demons," Horace chimed in. If they did not take this perfect opportunity to kill Caspian, he would definitely make their lives difficult in the future. Nixon and his men could see that Sylvia and her team were worn out from the battle earlier. Even though they were really powerful, they were not made of steel, as long as they put in the effort. Nixon and the rest could definitely kill these armored soldiers, as Sylvia and her team had already exhausted themselves from the previous battle. However, none of the expert martial artists stepped forward to participate. They were afraid. Sylvia and her team were really terrifying. The expert martial artists might think that they were strong, but when they fought with Sylvia earlier, they realized how weak they were. The armored soldiers' swordsmanship was out of this world. The method they used in combat was extremely terrifying. It did not matter how encouraging Nixon and the others were. The expert martial artists who had retreated did not dare to take another step forward. Sylvia guffawed. "Anyone else up for a challenge? What a bunch of losers," she mocked. Every single one of the expert martial artists looked pale. They wanted to get their revenge, but no one dared to take a step forward. Sylvia and her men were like demons. If the battle were to continue, more people would die. The more savage Sylvia was, the more they were afraid of facing her and the armored soldiers for another battle. Aster and Avery exchanged glances. Even though they were slightly injured, they felt satisfied. At that moment, they finally realized that battles like these were addictive. Sylvia scorned when she saw that the expert martial artists were all traumatized by the massacre. In her head, they were all useless. During her previous battles, the scenes she had witnessed were even more tragic than this. These expert martial artists had all considered themselves to be good fighters when they were, in fact, weak and useless. Sylvia shot a glance at Nixon and the others. With a look of disdain on her face, she asked, "I guess you're all from the TMAA and the mysterious Shadowgate? Oh, and there's also the Morrison family from Dord City. Why are all of you just standing there? If you have the guts, come fight me." Nixon, Gilbert, and the rest were all resentful after having been mocked. Sylvia was too arrogant. The expert martial artists she had defeated were just useless pawns. "Mr. Xandros, permission for battle. Mr. Shane, permission for battle." Instantly, the fighters from the TMAA and Shadowgate were not able to restrain themselves any longer. All they wanted in that instant was to teach Sylvia a lesson. They had already been humiliated by Caspian. Now, they were subjected to the same insults by a woman. They could not take it anymore. Nixon's and Gilbert's expressions darkened when their people started acting up. None of them dared to utter a word because they were extremely afraid. "Caspian, why are your subordinates even more arrogant than you?" Xandros asked, slightly bewildered. Caspian was already cocky. He did not expect Caspian's subordinates to be the same. If it were any ordinary person, they would have already died hundreds of times. However, Sylvia was not afraid. She had Caspian backing her up, so she had nothing to fear. "Mr. Stewart Sr., our powers don't allow us to be humble." Caspian smiled. Xandros spoke in a lowered voice to remind Caspian, "You'd better restrain yourself. We cannot fathom the strength of the TMAA and Shadowgate. You have to be careful. You can save your worries. Old man, I can even use one hand to crush these bastards to death." Caspian said nonchalantly. Caspian had never felt threatened by the folks from the traditional martial arts sphere. He had already stationed his men near the Stewart family estate, in preparation for an ambush. When the time came, Caspian would give a signal. When that happened, the TMAA and Shadowgate would have no choice but to surrender. "Mr. Xandros, please let us fight them. Yeah, we'd rather die with dignity than cower away. Kill! Kill! Kill!" Seeing the two figures seemingly unperturbed, the men could not hold it in any longer. When did they ever have to suffer this kind of humiliation before? Why did they have to accept Caspian's insults? How would they be able to continue their lives as fighters if they were humiliated? Gilbert and Nixon exchanged glances. Both of them knew deep down that if they continued remaining silent, they might have to lose their men. Nobody would want to follow a leader without self-respect. "Kill them!" Upon arriving at the same conclusion, both Nixon and Gilbert shouted at the same time. Their shouts shook the earth. With both the TMAA and Shadowgate combined, there were around 6,000 people. All 6,000 of these men were exalted. Their hearts were full of the drive to kill. They could not wait to tear Sylvia and the armored soldiers into a million pieces. Nixon and Gilbert also knew that Sylvia had lost some of her strength in the previous combat. It would definitely be a good thing if they could take this opportunity to get rid of Caspian. It could boost morale and also stabilize their position within the traditional martial arts sphere. "Miss Morrison, should we make a move as well?" Ginger asked cautiously. Chapter 407, An Overpowering Roar. "Shut your mouths! All of you stay still," Jin said coldly. The soldiers lowered their heads, not daring to disobey her orders. Jin was only thinking about Caspian. The more indifferent Caspian was, the more she admired him. Sylvia laughed. "I guess you're all going to attack at the same time? You cowards can't take it anymore, huh? Sylvia taunted as she saw several forces making a move. These words angered them even more. Suddenly, a person's figure swept by. Caspian, Sylvia said deferentially. Sylvia, you were a little impulsive this time, Caspian said as he shot Sylvia a glance, looking rather upset. It was not that he doubted her strength. However, they had already used up too much of their strength in the battle earlier. If they were to fight against the TMAA and Shadowgate again, they would surely lose some soldiers. Every single one of the armored soldiers was selected from various places from miles away. Diatoran could not afford to lose even one of the soldiers. Sylvia felt abashed. Indeed, she had only taunted them on impulse. Only after Caspian told her off did she suddenly feel afraid. If any of these armored soldiers were to be injured or killed, she would not be able to forgive herself. Nevertheless, she knew deep inside that with Caspian here, nothing of the sort would happen. I'll punish you after we've resolved the matters here, Caspian said as he stared at Sylvia. Yes, sir. Sylvia nodded deferentially. She would gladly accept any kind of punishment from Caspian. Caspian's countenance was calm as he watched Gilbert, Nixon, and the others rush toward him. He took a few steps forward. The onlookers were a little dumbfounded. What did Caspian mean by this? Could it be that he planned to fight the 6,000 fighters alone? That was too inconceivable. Caspian was strong, that was undeniable. But to go up against 6,000 fighters was like having a death wish. After all, Gilbert and Nixon were at the peak level of being an eternal grandmaster. Caspian was being too cocky. The spectators were anticipating Caspian's obliteration. When Gilbert and Nixon saw Caspian stepping forward leisurely with his hands behind his back, both their faces darkened. He might be powerful, but there was no way that he could turn the tide of the battle on his own. Nonetheless, he looked as if he was confident that victory was his. It truly irritated the people watching. Kill him, Gilbert roared. The pace of the 6,000 people army was getting faster. Every single one of them was overzealous. They could not wait to crush everything in their way. Aster and Avery felt extremely uneasy. Miss Frost, should we help him? Both of them looked at Sylvia and asked in a concerned tone. They were confident in Caspian's abilities. Nonetheless, it still appeared dangerous. If anything was to happen to Caspian, they would be doomed as well. Don't worry. They're just a bunch of losers. They're no match for Caspian. Back then, when Caspian was at the border, he defeated several 100,000 soldiers on his own. There are only a few thousand people this time. It's a piece of cake for him, Sylvia said leisurely. Whenever Sylvia was reminded of that battle, she would feel extremely proud. After that battle, Caspian was named the Diatoran god of war by the king. Ever since then, Caspian became a legend among the three armies. Aster and Avery fell into a daze as they listened. What was Sylvia talking about? They knew nothing about the things that happened in the military. Jin became nervous when she saw that Caspian was going to fight alone. She kept her eyes glued on Caspian. In case he was in danger and needed help, she would be the first one to rush out and rescue him. In an instant, Gilbert and the others had arrived in front of Caspian. Gilbert threw a powerful punch at Caspian. Caspian was unperturbed. "Fuck off!" Caspian roared. His voice was deafening like the rumbling thunder. Thousands of expert martial artists trembled when they heard this voice. Some of the weaker ones started spitting out mouthfuls of blood. Even Nixon and Gilbert were slightly affected. Everyone gasped for air. It was terrible. Caspian had startled thousands of brawny fighters. Everyone looked at Caspian in horror. Can a human do that? Aster and Avery gulped. This scene was too terrifying. How could thousands of experts be overpowered from a bellow? Suddenly, everyone stared at Caspian with a shocked expression on their faces. Could it be that Caspian's powers had surpassed that of an innate grandmaster? People with the level of a supreme grandmaster were rare in Diatoran. Moreover, many of them were already old and had retired long ago. Caspian was only in his 20s. To be able to achieve the level of a supreme grandmaster at this age would definitely shock everyone. Caspian is a god. He's the god of war, Sylvia said proudly. What? Aster and Avery were startled. In Sylvia's eyes, Caspian was a legend. He was the invincible god of war. How could such a man not be admired? Aster and Avery were stunned. Even a strong woman like Sylvia held Caspian in such high regard. Everyone was curious as to how powerful Caspian really was. How terrifying! Who is he, really? At this moment, everyone felt uncertain. Ginger's expression turned even more awful. Previously, she thought that Caspian was only a cowardly and useless matrilocal son-in-law. It seemed like she had gotten it all wrong. Caspian was a hero. Jin had not set her eyes on the wrong man. Caspian was better than most people. It would be impossible for anyone else to take the Eldorian Scroll fragment away from Caspian. While others were drowned in concern, Jin was looking at Caspian adoringly. It doesn't matter how you treat me, Caspian. I've decided. In this lifetime, I'm going to choose you. I want to have you. I want to own you, Jin murmured with a look of determination on her face. Caspian remained where he was, as supercilious as ever. In his eyes, these thousands of expert martial artists were weak. My men, there's no need for you to join me in this battle. As for the ones who want to challenge me, I'll be here until the end, Caspian said coldly as he looked at Nixon and the rest. Caspian sounded calm, but the ones who heard it were frightened. Nixon, Gilbert, and the others remained frozen where they were, not daring to make a move. Let's go, Caspian said as he gestured for them to follow him. Then, he turned around and walked into the tomb. Everyone else could only watch. Not one person dared to take a step forward. After you, Mr. Stewart Sr. It's your territory, after all. It wouldn't be right for me to take the lead, Caspian looked at Xandros and said, smiling. Xandros scoffed at how cunning Caspian was. He must have asked Xandros to enter first as he was worried that there were still traps inside. Nevertheless, Caspian's performance earlier had also shocked Xandros. Caspian's powers were definitely much stronger than he expected. Xandros entered the tomb, with Caspian following behind. Sylvia led the armored soldiers and entered the tomb as well. Aster and Avery followed suit. Caspian and the others had entered the tomb, leaving the thousands of dazed expert martial artists outside. They were at a loss. Chapter 408 Rare Treasures. Do we go in now? Are we going to admit defeat? The Eldorian Scroll fragment is inside. We can't just give up so easily, can we? The people were having a heated discussion. They did not want to lose out on the opportunity as well. They were stuck in a dilemma. Going in would be dangerous, but if they were to leave now, all their efforts would be wasted. However, they were afraid of provoking Caspian if they were to follow him inside. Nobody wanted to give up or act rashly. Mr. Xenos, what should we do next? Horace went to Nixon's side and asked. Even though he knew that Nixon was not fond of him, he had to obey Nixon's orders as he was the leader of this operation. As long as Nixon had not given any instructions, Horace would not dare to make any decisions on his own. Let's go. We'll follow them inside. We've already lost thousands of our men. If we return without the Eldorian Scroll fragment, the chairman won't let us go, Nixon said through gritted teeth. They did not gain anything from this trip to South Lake City. Instead, they lost 1,000 of their expert martial artists. Even Horace lost one of his arms. He had even gotten internal injuries as well. If they failed to bring the Eldorian Scroll fragment back, not only would Nixon be dismayed, but they would also have to face punishment from the chairman upon their return to Dord City. Let's go! Horace gestured for the men to follow him. The remaining 3,000 to 4,000 men of the TMAA entered the tomb. The members of Shadowgate began getting anxious when they saw the people of the TMAA making a move. Mr. Shane, let us go as well. The people of the TMAA have already gone inside. If we go in any later, the Eldorian Scroll. Nobody knew the exact situation within the tomb, but they could not just give up like this. Let's go, Gilbert said after making up his mind. When the expert martial artists saw the two forces making a move, they felt the need to follow suit. One after another, the people entered the tomb. Everyone had come here for the purpose of obtaining the Eldorian Scroll fragment. Jin remained standing where she was. The entire time, Caspian never even looked at her once. This made her feel dejected. Ms. Morrison, Ginger asked in an anxious tone. Those from the Morrison family were looking somber. They had come for the Eldorian Scroll fragment, but their plan seemed to have been messed up because their leader only had her eyes on Caspian. If this continued, it would not be possible for them to obtain the Eldorian Scroll fragment. When the time came, they would have to be punished. Jin managed to recompose herself very quickly. Her chest rose and fell. With resolution, she said, "Let's go." With that, The people from the Morrison family also entered the tomb. Mount Evercloud became empty in an instant. Only corpses and rivers of flowing blood remained. Suddenly, a low rumble could be heard from a distance. Hundreds of SUVs appeared at the foot of Mount Evercloud. Many armed soldiers alighted from the SUVs. These soldiers had been through hundreds of battles and rigorous training. Caspian had mobilized a reinforcement corps to be stationed near the Stewart family estate. Their objective was to secure the Eldorian Scroll fragment. Even though their numbers were just shy of 10,000, their combat skills were very strong. A composed man alighted from the leading car. He had a look of determination on his face. He was John Anderson, the senior general of South Eridlands. He was also Caspian's former subordinate. In order for this operation to be smooth, John was personally leading the team. "Have this place cleaned up," John ordered. "When we enter the tomb, kill everyone except Caspian and our men." "Yes, sir." Thousands of soldiers were ready. John glanced at the tomb. The Eldorian Scroll fragment must not fall into the hands of evil. Inside the tomb, Caspian and the others had been walking on a very long stretch of narrow path before they had a sudden realization. The scene before them was truly astonishing. There was a very wide valley. There was plenty of light here. It looked like paradise. The place looked nothing like a tomb. There was lush green grass on the ground with many animals running around. How could there be such a tomb? "Mr. Stewart Sr., are you sure that this is a tomb and not a resort?" Caspian asked Xandros, looking mildly confused. Xandros smiled, feeling delighted. He had guessed that Caspian and the others would be surprised. The predecessors of the Stewart family chose this place specifically when they were looking for a burial site. "This valley is well hidden behind Mount Evercloud," Xandros explained. "However, you mustn't run around as you wish. There are a lot of traps in here," he continued. The people were shocked. It went without saying that they would not dare to run around. Having arrived at a place like this, everyone had become very energetic. "There's no need for you to be afraid. Just follow me and you'll be fine," Xandros said with a smile. "Mr. Stewart Sr., you'd better take extra care so that we won't be harmed," Caspian said as he looked at Xandros. Caspian had been deceived by this old man several times. Caspian was not even sure whether to believe him or not. Did he have a map of this tomb? Xandros was already so old. Would he be able to remember the structures inside? "You little punk. I was just messing with you that time. I still expect you to protect the Eldorian Scroll fragment," Xandros said irritably. "Come on. Now," he continued. Xandros led the way as Caspian and the others followed closely behind. Nixon and the others were also following behind. They had seen the valley as well. How could this be? When they saw the scenery inside, they were all blown away as well. It turned out that there was another pot of gold within the tomb. "Mr. Xenos, it seems like Caspian and the others have just passed by this area. Should we catch up to them?" Horace asked cautiously as he kept his eyes on the ground. "I didn't expect this place to be like a paradise. This is really surprising." Nixon was wonderstruck. "Mr. Xenos," Horace urged. "What's with the rush? Let's just wait for the people from Shadowgate to arrive first. If we bump into Caspian now, we'll only be killed," Nixon said coldly. Horace was silent instantly. A few minutes had passed when a group of people appeared. They were the people from Shadowgate. Gilbert laughed. "You're pretty fast, Nixon," Gilbert teased. "Let's hurry inside. Caspian and the others have already gone in. If we delay any longer, we won't be able to obtain anything," Nixon said. "That's right. There's no time to lose. Let's hurry and catch up with them," Gilbert said with a serious tone. The others followed suit. Behind them were thousands of expert martial artists. Jin and her team were also following behind. On the other hand, Caspian and his men had entered the valley and reached a dense forest. Colossal trees towered over them. "Wow, that's such a huge cranesbill. There's so much saffron." Chapter 409, The Stairway to Enlightenment. When Caspian and the others arrived at the forest, they discovered a lot of rare gems. There were various valuable medicinal herbs here that were not sold anywhere. After Sylvia and the others picked a lot of cranesbill and saffron, they quickly left the area. Since there were many people who had followed them into the tomb, they needed to pick up their pace. The sky gradually darkened. The forest was going to become more dangerous. In a quagmire not far from Caspian's troop, screams sounded one after another. It was frightening to hear. Mr. Xandros, we've killed the giant crocodiles. Unfortunately, we lost 2 men, Horace reported with a glum expression. They managed to discover a type of century-old shining crane's bill. Since it was a rare treasure, the men from the TMAA and Shadowgate began fighting each other over the herb. And as they were fighting, dozens of giant crocodiles suddenly appeared. In situations like this, even an expert martial artist would not be able to win with their fists. This made Nixon feel worried. He had brought 5,000 men with him, but more and more of them had died. He could not be sure how many men would have survived by the time they returned. Nevertheless, they had fortunately managed to get their hands on the shining crane's bill. Once again, both Nixon and Gilbert gave their order to chase after Caspian. They must not let Caspian be the one to take away the Eldorian Scroll fragment. It was at that moment when several sparks suddenly appeared in the forest. A group of people sat around a campfire. Various fresh meat from wild beasts were being roasted. How much farther do we have to go, Mr. Stewart Sr.? Caspian asked Xandros as he looked around. There's no need to rush. Once we get through this forest, we'll arrive at the grave, Xandros said calmly. Inferring from Xandros' words, it seemed like they would have to continue walking until dawn. It would be very dangerous to spend the night in the forest. Have your men be more vigilant tonight, Xandros said. The sound of wild beasts roaring came from all directions. Suddenly, many wild beasts appeared near the campfire. Nevertheless, the beasts would not dare to approach them because of the campfire. After the group finished their meal, the men planned to deal with the beasts that were surrounding them. Half an hour later, a lot of carcasses filled up the place. Caspian and his men did not stop for too long. They continued their journey. More than 10 minutes after they left, Nixon and Gilbert had arrived at the campsite. They were startled when they saw the wolf carcasses on the ground. When they looked at the freshly cooked meat on the fire pit, their mouths began watering. They had been rushing the whole time and had also encountered many dangers. They had been walking for several hours without having anything to eat. It seems like they left not long ago, Nixon said as he took a look around. That's right. I'm guessing Caspian has also made a pretty big loss, Gilbert said. Should we continue chasing after them? He asked. That goes without saying, but we should be more careful. Let's make way for them. We'll have the others explore the roads before us, Nixon said as he smiled wickedly. Both Gilbert and Nixon looked at each other, and they knew what each other had in mind. In their evil scheme, they planned to have the other expert martial artists become their stooges. At the very beginning, there were tens of thousands of expert martial artists. 2,000 of them died at the tomb's entrance. After entering the tomb, nearly 3,000 of them were killed by the wild beasts they had encountered in the valley. What was initially a formidable troop had been reduced to half. Nonetheless, they had no reason to retreat. They could only press on. The remaining expert martial artists began their chase after Caspian once again. Suddenly, whooshing sounds could be heard. Many arrows flew toward them. A lot of the expert martial artists did not even have time to react and were killed instantly. Take cover. We've been trapped. Run. I don't want to die. The wailings came and went. They retreated hurriedly. As they were retreating, the ground beneath their feet gave way. An enormous pit appeared out of nowhere. Inside the pit were razor-sharp spears. None of the people who fell in survived. They were all brutally impaled. Nixon and the others, who were at a distance, were dumbfounded. There really were traps all over the place. They were fortunate to have taken precautions and let the others walk in front of them. Otherwise, they would have been the ones killed. The TMAA and Shadow were cunning to have gotten the other forces to walk in front of them to test the routes for them. Astor and Avery had been hiding in the shadows. They witnessed everything. You may go without me. Report everything to Mr. Lynch, Avery said. I'll stay put and continue monitoring, she continued. Astor nodded and left. The retreating expert martial artists had lost another 1 to 2,000 of their men. The number of their men had fallen below 4,000. There were many corpses on the ground. Even the ones in the pit had piled up like hills. A lot of them began to regret joining this mission. Mr. Xandros, do we continue following them? Horace asked anxiously. It's way too dangerous here. Nixon sighed. He did not expect that it would be this difficult to obtain the Eldorian Scroll fragment. We have no choice but to continue, Gilbert said helplessly. They had no other choice. The expert martial artists would not continue this journey anymore. Caspian and the others arrived at the grave the next day. It was a palace. It was completely hidden in the mountains. Caspian, the grave of the Stewart family, is right in front. To get inside, you'll have to go through the stairway to enlightenment. The stairway to enlightenment? Caspian asked in a confused manner. Do you see those stairs? They're made entirely from special stones. It'll take a lot of effort to climb, Xandros said as he pointed at the stairs. Caspian looked at the stairway. He discovered that the stairs were suspended in midair. Those stones were not ordinary stones at all. They must be magnetic. Caspian, allow me. Mr. Lynch, we'll go. Sylvia and Aster walked over. Both of them wanted to take the lead. Aster, you go first, Caspian said as he shot him a glance. Yes, sir, Aster replied, nodding. He had to perform well this time. Sylvia did not try to argue with Caspian's decision because she fully obeyed his orders. Aster did not think much about the stairs. He took a deep breath and began walking up the stairs. Nothing out of the ordinary happened during his first 2 steps. This made Aster let his guard down. However, as he progressed, something felt off. The higher he went, the more difficult it became. Every time he took another step, his step would become heavier, as if he was being sucked by the stone. It was extremely difficult for him to even lift his foot. There must be something strange going on with these stairs. Aster was upset. He had wanted to present himself well before Caspian. Suddenly, he slipped and fell. A pair of big hands stopped him from falling. I'm ashamed, Mr. Lynch. There's something strange about these stairs. The higher you climb, the more it feels like you're carrying a huge mountain on your back. It's so hard to even move an inch, Aster said, feeling somewhat embarrassed. He was dismayed. He had wanted to give Caspian a good show. Who could have guessed that it would end in humiliation? It's okay, Caspian consoled him. Suddenly, there were whooshing sounds. Thousands of people suddenly came sprinting out. Nixon and the others had caught up with them. Caspian, I've finally caught up with you, Nixon said with a smile. Chapter 410, want to bet? When Gilbert and Nixon saw Caspian, both their eyes were filled with resentment. They had encountered all sorts of danger during their journey. They had even lost many of their subordinates. I was wondering who it was, but it's just you losers, Caspian taunted. Don't be so cocky, Caspian. Once we get the Eldorian Scroll fragment, you'll surely die, Nixon said scornfully. The remaining few thousand expert martial artists looked at Caspian. They were hungry for Caspian to die brutally under their swords. As long as Caspian was alive, no one else would have the chance to obtain the Eldorian Scroll fragment. You want the Eldorian Scroll fragment, right? Go ahead. Once you've made your way to the end of the stairway to enlightenment, it'll be yours. We'll see if you have the ability to do it, Caspian said as he pointed at the stairs. Caspian moved aside to clear the path for them. Everyone was momentarily stunned. What was happening? Caspian had been arrogant this whole time, and now he was actually giving way for them to have a head start? Now that they were one step away from the Eldorian Scroll fragment, Caspian wanted to let someone else go first? Everyone exchanged glances. Nobody dared to make a move. They did not want to get themselves killed by accident. What a bunch of losers. Forget it, Caspian said with a look of disdain on his face. His words made everyone spiteful. Isn't it just a few steps? What's there to be afraid of? We, Shadowgate, will take the first step. Once we get the Eldorian Scroll fragment, the first thing I'm going to do is kill you. Gilbert stepped forward and said, anyone can talk big. If you really can get the Eldorian Scroll fragment, be my guest, Caspian said with a smile. Sylvia and the others looked at Gilbert disdainfully. Gilbert was angry. Once he obtained the Eldorian Scroll fragment, he would surely kill Caspian. All of you, go, Gilbert said to the expert martial artists. Everyone was speechless. Gilbert had proclaimed loudly that he would go, but now he was afraid of going ahead. Mr. Shane, since Shadowgate is so powerful, you can go ahead first. That's right. Or are you afraid, Mr. Shane? My leg's cramping up. You go first. There were thousands of expert martial artists, and yet not even one dared to come forward. Nobody's stupid. This was not the time for anybody to step forward. Gilbert's face darkened when he saw that no one was offering themselves to go. A menacing energy suddenly burst out of him. Do you all want to die? Gilbert asked coldly. In the end, All martial artists were only useful for testing the routes for safety. If they did not want to test the route for him, he planned to kill them all. Caspian let out a booming laugh. Don't tell me the people from Shadowgate are all chickens, having others test the route for you? What a joke! I think it's better for Shadowgate to be dissolved. Bastard! How dare you mock Shadowgate? Mr. Shane, let us go. Once we get the Eldorian Scroll fragment, we'll kill him first. The members of Shadowgate shouted as they could no longer hold back when Caspian began insulting them. They knew deep down that the stairway to enlightenment would not be as simple as it looked. Nonetheless, they did not want to be looked down on by Caspian. Mr. Shane, allow me. Fabian came forward and said, All right, bring a few men with you, but be careful, Gilbert instructed. With Fabian stepping forward, it was a great help to Shadowgate. Yes, sir, Fabian nodded. He looked toward the members of Shadowgate and asked, Who's willing to rush inside? Come with me. About 20 people stepped forward. Not bad. We'll show them that Shadowgate is not made up of cowards, Fabian said with determination. Following this, he led more than 20 people and rushed forward. Astor kept a close watch on these people. He already knew about the oddity of the stairway to enlightenment. He was curious to see if the people of Shadowgate could get through. The others also held their breaths and paid close attention as they anticipated the outcome. Be careful, everyone, Fabian said in a serious tone. Yes, sir, the subordinates of Shadowgate shouted. They were not stupid either. There must be a reason why Caspian made way for them to have a go at it first. Fabian took a deep breath as he took the first step on the stairs. Nothing happened. You must be trying to fool us, Fabian said nonchalantly as he let out a long sigh of relief. He had thought that the stairway to enlightenment was something impressive and mysterious. But it turned out Caspian was just trying to scare them. Fabian increased his speed. The others also followed behind. What stairway to enlightenment? It's just a normal stairwell. Don't be scared, everyone. Let's use the fastest speed to get there. The Eldorian Scroll fragment will be ours, Fabian laughed. Charge! More than 20 Shadowgate members ran forward the fastest they could, get past a few steps before they began to. However, they had only managed to feel their legs sinking. Some even lost their balance and fell down. Fabian had also noticed that something was wrong. The higher he climbed, the harder it became. It felt as if there was a huge mountain pressing on him. But he did not care too much about it and continued his way up. With a loud bang, Fabian became overwhelmed and rolled down the stairs. Are you all right, Fabian? Shane ran toward and helped him up. At that moment, Fabian's entire face was covered in dirt. He felt really embarrassed. Mr. Shane, my incompetence has let you down. These stairs are strange. The higher we climbed, the heavier our steps became, Fabian said remorsefully. Gilbert's face went frigid. He had guessed that it would not be this simple. Otherwise, Caspian would not have made way for them. Gilbert shot Caspian a piercing glare. What are you glaring at? Who can you blame for your incompetence? Caspian smirked. Gilbert turned away, ignoring Caspian. When the others saw the members of Shadowgate fall, they began having second thoughts about going up the stairs. Why? It's such a good opportunity, but nobody dares to go anymore, huh? The people lowered their heads. Fabian had the strength of an eternal grandmaster. If he was not able to climb up the stairway to enlightenment, how could the others possibly achieve it? What a joke! All the expert fighters in the entire Diatoran are here, and yet none of you dare to climb a few stairs? Imagine how embarrassing it'd be if word of this were to get out. Caspian looked at the crowd and said with a smirk, Enough with the taunting. Caspian, why don't you just climb the stairs and show us how good you are? Nixon said irritably. That's right. You must be afraid as well, aren't you? That's why you let us go first, Gilbert chimed in. Shadowgate and the people of the TMAA looked toward Caspian with a contemptuous look. Wanna bet? Caspian sneered. Bet on what? Nixon and Gilbert asked with a frown on their faces. The three of us will climb the stairs at the same time. The one to reach the end first wins. What do you think? Caspian said as he took the wild saffron from Sylvia. This is the century-old saffron we managed to gather. It'll be the prize. What do you think? Caspian waved the saffron in his hand. Both Nixon and Gilbert were tempted when they saw the wager. This type of saffron was hard to come by, and its benefits were unimaginable. Even if one had money, They might not necessarily be able to buy it. It was priceless.